We are living in an era in which corruption is becoming so normalized that they're now targeting the last remaining remnants of campaign finance law, even after Citizens United effectively did away with most of that campaign finance law. That's how intense the effort to legalize and normalize corruption really is right now. The question of, can you literally trade in an explicit way campaign contributions for government favors, that may end up being not only normalized, but effectively legalized by the Supreme Court. This is not a conspiracy theory, this was a conspiracy.
All right, back on The Revolution. This is the show where we try to bring the left and right together to revolt against the establishment because they bathe in corruption and we can't stand it anymore. And we're gonna get rid of all the corporate Democrats and Republicans. So now we're bringing on guests. Some are saying, yeah, no matter where we are in the political spectrum, we're in favor of this revolution. Peaceful, nonviolent, obviously a political one. And they're saying why they care. Now, we're also bringing on other guests like the one I have on today, David Sirota. So David was a speechwriter for Bernie Sanders during his presidential campaigns, and he now runs The Lever. He's written in The Guardian, Rolling Stone, etc. And we want to talk to him about why we need that revolution, okay? Now, he's gonna lay out evidence for what's wrong with government, right? And so that's exactly what we're looking for here, and also what's wrong with media. So, David, you've written so many stories showing government corruption that it's hard to keep up. So I'm gonna try to focus on at least two of them here, but we'll keep bringing you guys back. We had a great reporter that did a wonderful story for The Lever last week as well about Big Pharma's power in taking over government and affecting it. But I wanna get to how they affect the media and how Barry Weiss directing CBS is not a new thing, right? It's part of a corporate scheme that you wrote about that's been around for decades. But first, I want to start with a different story you wrote about how JD Vance and others in the Trump administration are trying to aid and abet basically hypercharging Citizens United, putting it on steroids, and just instead of draining the swamp, making the entire government the swamp. So tell us what that case is.
Sure. So JD Vance has been spearheading a case that's gotten very little attention, which is designed to expand upon, or at least give the Supreme Court a chance to expand upon the old Citizens United ruling. The case is about, it's sort of a technical issue about limits on the amount of money that political parties can spend in coordination with political candidates, which sounds really technical. But what it's really about is eliminating, or at least limiting, the campaign donation limits that huge donors still face when it comes to direct donations to candidates. It's important to understand that the Citizens United ruling said that donations to essentially Citizens United in another case said donations to super PACs could not be limited because super PACs allegedly operate independently of candidates. Now that's an obvious legal fiction. The idea that a super PAC made up of a senator's former staffers spending millions and millions of dollars in support of that senator, the idea that super PAC is independent of that senator is ridiculous. It should be ridiculous to everybody, but that's the legal fiction the Supreme Court created. But it still maintained the idea that direct donations to candidates can be limited because direct donations can be inherently corrupting. So what the JD Vance case is about is trying to eliminate some of those limits so that party committees can essentially become pass-through shell entities for big donors to funnel even more money directly to candidates. So we are living in an era in which corruption is becoming so normalized that they're now targeting the last remaining remnants of campaign finance law, even after Citizens United effectively did away with most of that campaign finance law. That's how intense the effort to legalize and normalize corruption really is right now.
Okay, so I want to ask you about a Democratic councilman in Cincinnati that Donald Trump is helping. That looks like for no apparent reason. I mean, that's just crazy that Donald Trump cares about this tiny little case in Cincinnati, but how it connects to all this. But I'm going to ask you that in a minute. So first, look, there's so many of these cases, but recently we found out through leaked emails that Larry Ellison was talking to an Israeli ambassador and told him, I talked to Marco Rubio and I approved of him and he says he's going to support Israel. So I sent $5 million to his super PAC. I mean, that's not the corruption of appearance.
That's a reminder that super PACs are not really independent of the politicians that they purport to be independent of. And I think that's what's really important here, that the Supreme Court created this idea that super PACs operating independently cannot be corrupting influences on politicians. And there's plenty of examples like the one you just mentioned. I mean, go back to the Menendez case, Bob Menendez case in 2015, where what he was charged with, and that particular case ended in a mistrial, but what was documented was that Menendez was essentially trading favors for donations to a super PAC that was supporting him. So this whole idea that these super PACs that can accept unlimited money from billionaires and corporations, the idea that they are, non-corrupting and can't have any influence over politicians because they're technically on paper independent of those politicians, is just utterly and completely absurd.
I mean, look, if there were real journalists in the country like David, everybody would acknowledge the most obvious thing in the world. Super PACs can't be corrupting? I don't know anything more mental than that, right? So we would all know that the Supreme Court is driving towards this. We'll get to why they've been driving towards this for decades in a minute as well. But first, tell us the connection of JD Vance to this story.
Yeah, well, again, JD Vance is spearheading the case to get rid of these limits. He's spearheading this case that would get rid of the campaign finance limits. And you mentioned the other case, and it's important to remember there's two tracks of this. We call it in our book the Master Plan. We just released this book called Master Plan, which is the 50-year crusade to deregulate campaign finance laws, but also to destroy anti-bribery laws, right? There's campaign finance laws is one track of court cases, and then anti-bribery laws is a whole other track. In the last Supreme Court term, there was that case that some people might have heard about where there was a mayor of a local Indiana town who had been convicted of corruption because he gave a municipal contract to a government contractor, and soon after the government contractor gave him $10,000. He was convicted on corruption. The Supreme Court intervened to overturn the corruption conviction, saying that the sequence of events means that the payment, the $10,000 payment, wasn't a bribe. It was a gratuity. I mean, I'm not making this up. It sounds insane, but that's literally what the Supreme Court ruled. Now you have at the court a case where a former Democratic city council person from Cincinnati, who's been convicted on corruption charges, who had also been, by the way, it's important to know, pardoned by Donald Trump in that case. So he's already pardoned. This is the first example of a case being pushed forward, being appealed, even though the person has already been pardoned. And the case is trying to overturn the conviction. It was about campaign contributions made and the local city council person delivering a municipal development deal to donors who had a vested interest, a financial interest in that deal. And what's important to understand is that that the argument being made at the court now is for an appeal here is they cite that story of Donald Trump reportedly asking fossil fuel donors for $1 billion of campaign money and promising them that if they do that and he wins, he will deliver the fossil fuel industry big favors. This appeal cites that as essentially proof that the kind of a quid pro quo corruption that exists all throughout politics is now so endemic, that this transactional nature of politics is so endemic that it should not be considered a prosecutable crime. That's where we are. And you can imagine if this appeal moves forward, the question of can you literally trade in an explicit way campaign contributions for government favors, that may end up being not only normalized, but effectively legalized by the Supreme Court.
So just to review here, as if corporations giving unlimited money to super PACs wasn't bad enough, now corporations might be able to give unlimited money directly to parties, politicians, just shredding it completely. But on top of that, forget campaign contributions, now you can bribe politicians after the fact, okay? Now, I'm not saying I'm gonna pass this oil bill that's gonna get you billions of dollars in return for a bribe. I didn't say that at all, I just passed it. Oh, you gave me $1 million afterwards, and I put it in my pocket. That is actually currently perfectly legal.
You're actually understating it, because Trump, according to all the reports back then that haven't been denied, Trump was saying, help me with $1 billion and I will deliver for you, right? It was like very, and here's the thing that I think is important to remember. Donald Trump is like a pathological liar, statement to statement, but I do think the one benefit, if you can call it that, of the way Donald Trump carries himself is that he is effectively brazenly honest at the vibe level, in the sense of how he sees government as a fundamentally transactional endeavor. Like, I don't think he's trying to hide the fact in any real way that he sees government as a fundamentally transactional operation, and that he himself and his family, in sort of his view, is entitled to some of the winnings. And I think the reason I think that's a good thing that's sort of out there for everyone to see, and that he's essentially honest about it in a lot of ways, is that you can no longer deny it, right? You don't have to convince anyone anymore that what's going on is absurdly corrupt. We're beyond that. I think everybody can see that now, and thanks to Donald Trump, there's no pretense. The question is whether we're going to allow that to be normal and acceptable and legal or not. That's the question that hasn't yet been answered.
Yeah, so I'm going to get to how Democrats are in answering that question in a second. But look, first I'll make a quick point here. You said everybody sees the corruption now. Asterisks, except every national media reporter. Which is hilarious, right? So, okay, but last thing on that particular story. It's super strange for Trump to find a random councilman in Cincinnati from the other party and pardon him, unless he's trying to send a message, I want it to be okay to bribe government officials. Has anybody ever given an alternate explanation as to why he would help this rando in a case of bribery?
Well, and just to adding to that, I mean, this council person is being represented by Trump's former Solicitor General. And there are a lot of conservative groups that have been part of this master plan to deregulate campaign finance laws and to kill off anti-bribery laws. There are a lot of those groups that are supporting this appeal. So I think it's important you're right to say, this probably isn't just about one municipal development deal in one mid-sized city in Ohio. This is about trying to create a larger precedent to make it harder and harder, if not impossible, to prosecute bribery. That is what I think this master plan is truly aiming for. It's the holy grail that they are looking for. And the question then becomes, well, why? Right, and in publishing this book and in hearing from people, there's always the well, why? Who would want to really legalize corruption? And I think when you take it all the way back to the 1970s, because they're trying to dismantle the post-Watergate campaign finance and transparency laws and anti-bribery laws. The question is, why would they want to do that? And the answer is very clear. Was originally laid out in the so-called Powell memo, written by soon-to-be Supreme Court Justice Lewis Powell. He issued this memo saying that essentially democracy had created a government that was essentially too responsive to what the people wanted, and that corporations and the rich needed to better invest in politics to control the outcomes of public policy. And so the way to do that is, if you have a problem with a functioning one person, one vote democracy, if you're an oligarch or a corporation and that one person, one vote democracy is creating policies that perhaps benefit lots and lots of people, but you don't like because it threatens your power and your wealth, what you have to try to do is convert the system into a $1, one vote oligarchy. And so eliminating campaign finance laws and anti-bribery laws is a way to essentially subvert the will of what the public wants. And subverting that will is the desire of the people, the relatively few people who have most of the power and the wealth.
Yeah, I don't think it's complicated at all. Look, the Powell memo is a central part of David's book, Master Plan. It's also a central part of my book, Justice is Coming. Why? Because they just lay it out for you right there, and then they execute it for the next 50 years. You go back and it's word for word, things like cancel culture and hiding behind phrases like freedom. I mean, he said all the tricks in one memo. And basically the essence of what he's telling the Chamber of Commerce at the time is, duh, you have all the money, why don't you use it to seize power? And so, you believe in the power of ads, right? That's why you guys all run ads. So why don't we get into media? Why don't we get into politics? And most of all, let's capture the Supreme Court. And why would you want to make bribery legal? Well, if you're the one with all the money, bribery is going to be beautiful for you. You're going to get to buy all the government and then have them give you 10 times as much money. So anyone who starts out with that money advantage would normally naturally try to seize power in the way that corporations in this country have. And when we're revolting, we're not revolting against Ted Cruz or Pete Buttigieg. They're just servants of the corporate class, right? We're actually rebelling against corporate rule in aggregate. So which then now, we've talked about the Republicans and Trump and Vance and those guys. Now let's turn to the Democrats real quick. You wrote a piece, it's the corruption stupid, which I think is, probably the sentence I said most often in my book. Democrats have a chance to revive their party and save American democracy. Will they take it? Okay, how'd you answer that one, David?
Well, look, there are plenty of ways to combat this problem. And I think folks think, as I said, we're at this moment where corruption seems endemic. The question is whether we're going to allow it to remain endemic and just say that, corruption isn't corruption anymore, it's just politics. And the good news is that there are a lot of ways that this can be stopped, and there are a lot of people working on trying to roll this back. And I take solace in the fact that when you look at the history of how campaign finance laws and anti-bribery laws were deregulated and weakened, you understand that it was a plot. It was a plan. I mean, this is not a conspiracy theory. This was a conspiracy. I mean, it actually happened and is happening, and they wrote it all down and they executed it. And frankly, I don't think the people who executed it would deny it. So what I take solace in is the fact that it wasn't inevitable. It wasn't a force of nature. It was executed by specific people with a specific set of plans, and it can be rolled back. So I think when you look at, for instance, what is happening in Montana as one example. In Montana, a very red state, a group of people on both the right and left have come together to try to put a ballot measure on the ballot to change the state's corporate code, because corporations are artificial entities created by states, to change the state's corporate code to say corporations have every power that they currently have except for one power. They can no longer spend money on elections and politics. And that essentially would pull out a foundational building block of Citizens United. And it would create a template for other states to do the same kind of thing. You had a situation in Arizona, a purple state, where Arizona voted 70% to essentially end, it was a ballot measure, to end dark money, to require transparency. You had a situation in Maine, another purple state, that Maine just passed a ballot measure to effectively end super PACs, to use the Supreme Court's own precedent in a case, the federal court's own precedent to test the Citizens United case at the Supreme Court to say that yes, campaign contributions to super PACs can be limited. And then, of course, the ultimate thing that can be done, to my mind, the true holy grail of fixing this is public financing of elections. New York City, Zoran Mamdani, I would argue the primary way he was able to win that election was because he was in a system that provides an 8-to-1 public match, a real robust public financing system of elections that allows qualifying candidates access to public money instead of having to beg oligarchs for money that inevitably comes with the expectation of legislative favors. Zoran Mamdani was able to run a well-financed, competitively financed campaign, even as the oligarchs spent huge money against him. And without that public money, I don't think he would have had much of a campaign at all. There are various states and various cities that already have some public financing on their books. Those systems can be expanded. All the other states and cities that don't have them, it can be implemented there. Public financing, by the way, is not being challenged at the Supreme Court. In other words, it fits under the paradigm of Citizens United. So there isn't really a threat that the Supreme Court is going to intervene and end public financing systems that exist or that are created. To me, understanding what happened in New York through the prism of that system, that victory, understanding that. I mean, people want to say, it was Mamdani's message, it was his campaign ads, it was his slick videos. All of that played a part. But without competitive money, I don't think he would have been able to run a campaign. And that should be the takeaway. When you want to say, how do we get other outside the system candidates to be able to run real campaigns against oligarchy? To me, that is the real answer.
Yeah, so I'm very encouraged by what happened in New York. I totally agree with you that 8-to-1 public financing made all the difference. Encouraged by what happened in Maine. In fact, our Operation Hope volunteers phone banked for that and helped at the urging of Professor Larry Lessig. On the other hand, I'm a little less optimistic about the Montana thing. We did talk to Professor Lessig about that at the end of last week, and he came on to talk about it. And so there's some issues there, but mainly, David, the problem is that Montana already passed a great law 100 years ago, and then the Supreme Court knocked it down, right? And then South Dakota passed a great campaign finance law, anti-corruption law a while back in a ballot measure. And then the legislators were like, so what? We're just getting rid of it. We don't care what the voters think. So it's super tough to do it state by state, in my opinion. But if we did public financing and we got a constitutional amendment, that would, of course, make all the difference. But to the core of the question about the Democrats, so there are some great Democratic policies, and that's why I'm a Democrat to begin with on getting rid of money in politics, but they never actually do them, right? And so today we did this story about Center for American Progress still has Larry Summers advising them on what might be Project 2029. Oh my God, I mean, Larry Summers is patient zero for neoliberal corporate rule. So I don't think Democratic establishment has learned a single lesson. Do you?
I basically agree with you on that. I mean, I think the Democratic Party, as you and I have talked about before, the Democratic Party is constantly trying to find a middle ground between what people want and what the donors who are ruining people's lives want. And the reason why Democrats often sound so incoherent is because there really isn't a way to satisfy what voters want and what the people who are ruining voters' lives want. Like you can't square that circle. It is in a sense a zero-sum game. The current Democratic Party. I think there's a real chance for change here. This is the first time in my life, and I went back and I looked back at polls. This is the first time in my adult life that there has been such anger among Democratic voters aimed at the Democrats' current leadership. There is no precedent for that. When you look at polling numbers, there's no precedent for that in our lifetime. And I think that anger and outrage is right on. I think it's legitimate, and I think it opens up the possibility for genuine change. I thought there was that possibility back in 2007, 2008. I wrote a book called The Uprising, where I said there's this anger in politics, and the next era of politics is going to be a competition to harness that anger. And if it's going to go either in a center-left direction or a far-right direction, and I had hope at that point that it could go into a center-left, non-far-right direction. I think those hopes were sort of youthful, naive hopes. We're now, 17 years, 18 years later, and now I look at the polls about how Democratic voters feel about their own leadership, which is not how they were feeling about their own leadership back then. There was still affinity among Democratic voters, liberal voters, for the Democratic leadership. Now that dynamic has changed. And to me, that is the best political news of this era, because it creates the possibility to finally overthrow the current leadership of the Democratic Party, overthrow them at the polls, overthrow them inside of the party. And we have not experienced that in our lifetime. I mean, it may not happen, but those are the conditions for real change.
Yeah, and now they're finally, well, there's at least one, and maybe a couple of Democrats who are actually fighting the good fight, like Ro Khanna, right? Mm-hmm. So he's not like doing fake fighting. He's actually trying to help on all of these issues and get money out of politics and turn the party around, et cetera. So,
and can I add one thing? I think it's important for everyone to understand that this is not going to change because of the goodness of a couple of politicians' hearts. I mean, you mentioned Ro Khanna, who I think is doing great work. The way I think this is going to change is that enough politicians inside the Democratic Party will see a political opportunity for themselves to be the champions of change. You know, I have kind of a view of politicians as amoral machines, as levers of power, if you will. And that if you change the dynamic and the conditions around them, enough of them will, in their own ambitious way, because they are all ambitious, they will see a self-interest in championing better change, real constructive change. And so I guess what I'm saying is this is less about one or another politician who happens to be, have a good person or have, decent ideas, and more about how do you create the conditions for them to feel that they have to change. Essentially, to use the Martin Luther King analogy, the politicians are essentially thermometers. It's up to the rest of us to be the thermostat.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. We're a little bit out of time, but I'm gonna go to one more question anyway, because we talked about the Lewis Powell memo. He also talked about the media. Part of the reason the Democratic politicians didn't do it before is because mainstream media didn't give them permission. So if they talked about how the rest of the politicians were corrupt, mainstream media would have ripped their face off, rhetorically, politically, et cetera, right? And so now people are concerned about Barry Weiss going over to CBS and taking it in a corporate direction. Is that a new phenomenon, David?
It's not a new phenomenon. I'm glad, and what we wrote about came out of our book. So the Powell memo happens, and people, I think they know, they've heard about the Powell memo, but there's been this theory that the Powell memo was kind of like a 1970s version of a Reddit thread that kind of went viral and then disappeared. But what we uncovered are documents showing how the conservative movement operationalized it. A series of documents showing that the Chamber of Commerce created literally a task force on implementing the Powell memo. And among the members of those task forces were some of the most powerful people in corporate America, including some of the top executives at the largest media corporations in the country. And they had meetings detailing what they were doing to influence those media entities. CBS's own president, according to a letter that we obtained and published in our book, CBS's own president wrote a letter saying not only does he support the goals of the Powell memo, but that he believed that CBS News was becoming too sympathetic, essentially, to the opponents of Lewis Powell, too sympathetic to those who were critiquing free market capitalism, and that he was, quote, this is a quote, working to correct the situation at CBS News. Now, I bring that up because I think then you see the through line here in what's happening, not only at CBS News with Barry Weiss, but throughout the entire media. It is an admission that the owners of media understand that their media entities are political weapons for ownership's cause. And I think it's important to be media literate about that. It doesn't mean that there's no good journalism inside of these media outlets, but it means that media outlets, the biggest media outlets in the world, are often used as political instruments for the people who control and own those outlets. And I think now Now I don't think anybody would really, in any serious way, anybody would deny that. I mean, I remember back, and you probably remember this too, 5 years ago, Bernie Sanders cracked a joke about how the Washington Post wasn't all that nice to him, and maybe that had something to do with Jeff Bezos owning the paper, and he was vilified for saying that. I don't think anybody would deny anymore that the owners of media companies are political actors who often influence their political properties. And again, I would say this: I'm glad that there's less pretense, because at least now we can speak honestly about what's actually going on.
Yeah, and look, I'm in favor of transparency. So we do a show and we say it's progressive, it's populist, but these days nonpartisan, and you see us criticize Republican Democrats, and we always stick to the facts. So you can stick to the facts and have a perspective, and that's more honest. What mainstream media does is they cover their perspective. Not only that, they then pretend that they're the only objective ones. So
they pretend the voice of God. They pretend to be the voice of God. They pretend to have no ideology, while the ideology is baked inside of what stories they're selecting, what they're looking to preference, what they're looking to eye roll at.
100%. And so they privilege their own pro-corporate, pro-status quo position as if it's objective, when it's not even close to objective, when they believe preposterous things. Well, whether they believe it or not is a different question, but they say preposterous things like politicians are not affected by the millions of dollars given to them by corporate donors. I mean, how could you call yourself a journalist and say such a preposterous thing, right? Yet almost everyone in mainstream media says that. So, all right, well, we're trying to break it down for you guys. David, we appreciate you coming on. Everybody check out The Lever. So that's where they do great reporting. And check out Master Plan. That's the new book that shows you exactly how the corporate world took over our government and now runs it. And you see it from its very beginning to how they executed, as David explained, to the infinite corruption that we have now. And that's exactly why we need a revolution, a political one, to get our government back. All right, thank you, brother, appreciate it.
Thank you, thanks for having me.
Yeah, no problem. All right, guys, so for the members, stay right here. I'm gonna do a quick couple of stories about my time in media and a couple of times that bosses in the media companies I worked for gave me a little wink and a nudge. Hey, you better go in this direction instead of that direction. They're telling stories, so we'll do that for the members now.